We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. Nick Barris here. I'm joined by Murfreesboro MTSU professor John Weil. We're talking about gun rights, the Second Amendment, and the like in the wake of these recent mass shootings. And Professor Weil, I was just looking at some of the latest news coming out this morning, and they're talking about how the House Judiciary Committee right now plans to vote as soon as Thursday on wide-ranging gun control legislation after these mass shootings. The bill, among other things, would raise the lawful age, you talked about this, to purchase a semi-automatic rifle from 18 to 21 years. We know that the shooter in Texas, the day after his birthday, turning 18, went and bought those two weapons. It would also establish new federal offenses for gun trafficking and for selling large capacity magazines, and allow local government to compensate individuals who surrender such magazines through a buyback program. And we've heard, by the way, that Canada is starting a very large program like that. So these things that lawmakers are considering, some say they go too far, others say they don't go far enough, but they're all possible under the Second Amendment, correct?
Well, they're possible to pass them now. It'll ultimately be up to the courts probably to decide whether
if they were challenged, sure.
But in the McDonnell case, well, in both Heller and McDonnell, the justices who voted to expand the definition of of the Second Amendment did have a fair number, that they indicated at the time that gun ownership was not an absolute right.
Yeah.
And so, based on that language, I think they would accept what I would consider to be reasonable gun regulations. One thing that we need to remember is we own more guns. There are more guns in the United States, as I understand it, than there are people. So whatever legislation we pass is likely, it might nibble around the edges. It might make a few of these less likely, but with the number of guns that are already here, it's unlikely that it's going to, significantly reduce the number of suicides, for example, which is actually the leading cause of gun death right now in the United States.
Let's take a phone call or two, Professor. We've got Ron first. Ron, good morning. Hi, Ron.
How do you do?
Good morning to you. What's on your mind?
Well, the thing is, every time a problem like, and I really feel for the people that lost their lives, the kids and everything, but they always go after law-abiding citizens, and they go after laws that we go by. And then they're trying to take away the rights of us. These people are nuts that do things like that. We don't want to see people hurting one another. That's far from our thing. So I really get upset about this. Why do they go after us all the time? Not unless they're trying to get guns away from us so they can take care or control us even more, the government. And that's why I'm afraid of them taking it away and giving any kind of law. Because once they take one thing, they go to the next thing, and they do a little at a time, and then they take all our rights away. And that's why people are saying no, not at all.
Okay. I've heard that before, Professor. Some worry that, it's a slippery slope, and if you place some limits on one or the other, I guess my question to him would be, what is he really afraid of here? No one is going to suggest taking away guns from law-abiding citizens, but they may place limits. Is the issue here, he thinks it's like targeting law-abiding citizens, which means, I guess, if one of these laws passes restricting, some of these assault-type weapons, then a law-abiding citizen who wants one could not get one. But right. I think the idea is like what you just said. There are so many guns out there. Maybe placing some limits on the most destructive could be a good thing. It's not necessarily targeting someone like Ron.
One analogy that has been made is regulation of cars. Mm-hmm. We permit people, we have an age restriction, I think usually 16, 17. You can't actually get a license until you've passed a test. You typically get a learner's permit where you're sort of driving under somebody else's supervision. And actually, you can forfeit your right to drive a car. If you're caught DUI and convicted enough times, they can actually take your driver's license away, or put something on your car that you can't drive when you're drunk. And I don't particularly like buying a license, and I guess sometimes I'd rather drive 90 than I would 70. But it doesn't seem to me to be, as a law-abiding citizen, if you tell me I can't drive more than 70, that sounds reasonable to me. So, I think maybe that's a better way to look at it. But I understand. I mean, we should, the founders believed in being very vigilant about liberties, but, they also distinguish liberty from license. And why an 18-year-old needs to buy not one, but two semi-automatic weapons is sort of beyond me.
Yeah, that's the question. And I don't know. I mean, Ron, are you still there?
Well, that I have to agree with.
Ron, are you still there, Ron?
Yeah, yes. I agree with him when it comes to that.
Yeah.
When he was just saying about people 18 years old getting guns like that, that should have been a red flag right there when people were selling it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think Ron is someone, Professor, who supports the Second Amendment and is probably a gun owner himself. But I think that's the difference, Ron. It's interesting. So many people have that initial reaction that I think Ron has. But then if you talk to him a little more, I think he is like most Americans, even those who are very avid supporters of the Second Amendment and gun owners themselves, who would agree that selling, these types of weapons to an 18-year-old right then and there probably, it's just not smart. I mean, how that's allowed to me is frankly absurd.
I mean, we have laws in many states, right, that prohibit alcohol consumption until one is 21. And so, I think that's pretty reasonable. Yeah,
so it's interesting, though. I think that I don't know what the lawmakers, and they seem so afraid, especially some of the lawmakers that clearly get a large amount of money from the gun lobby, of saying anything. I mean, I do believe the vast majority of Americans, like Ron, who is a gun supporter and an owner and all of this, I think support the idea of maybe some limits on, say, the one case we were just talking about. And yet it just seems to me in D.C., it's a non-starter because any senator who's getting money from the NRA, if he goes that way, is going to upset them, is going to be worried about them targeting him for defeat,
It's interesting that the National Rifle Association, of course, is in some trouble right now because some of its leaders seem to be spending money fairly liberally on themselves. But it initially started out more as a gun safety kind of thing. It wasn't till the late 60s or 70s that the primary focus became the Second Amendment, and not just the Second Amendment, but what I would say is sort of an ultra extreme interpretation of the Second Amendment, that that means no regulations of any kind.
Let's take a call, or do we need to take a break first, Mary Lane? Do we have time? Yeah, we'll take Ann real quick, Professor, before we go to the break. Ann, good morning. Hi, Ann.
Good morning. Since January 1st, our law-abiding citizens have allowed 625 guns to be stolen from their cars.
Yeah.
And we've had 873 guns in total stolen here in Nashville. This weekend, we had 14 mass shootings in the United States, just over Memorial Day weekend. 14 mass shootings. 9 people were killed and 60 were injured. That happened on top of the loss of all those children and teachers last week. Let me repeat that. 14 mass shootings. We've become so desensitized that we overlook the fact that 14 mass shootings took place over Memorial Day weekend while we were celebrating our loved ones that fought for us in World War II. Something has got to be done. Our law-abiding citizens allowed 625 guns to be stolen out of their cars. That is not gun safety. 873 guns were stolen and allowed to be used in crimes That is not gun safety. Mass shootings that occur on a 3-day weekend, killing 9 and injuring 60, is not gun safety. Our laws have got to be changed. Our innocent are dying, and we are doing nothing because we have become desensitized to everything going on around us.
And let me get the professor to just comment, well, not really a question there, but she's right. She's referring to some of the statistics Professor Metro Police report every couple of weeks. Let's see. There's a lot of gun owners who buy weapons legally that are not responsible. In fact, they're idiots. I mean, if you're leaving your car unlocked with your gun there on the seat and it gets stolen, you're an idiot. And unfortunately, that happens a lot.
Well, and one of the mass shootings occurred did it not, this last weekend in Chattanooga?
Yes.
It's, one of the things that's changed is it used to be, we've had gangs for a long time, and you've, certainly had teenagers and whatever that get in disputes, but things that used to be taken to fisticuffs or maybe a knife every now and then, the first reaction now seems to be to pull out a gun. And that part of our culture is really a threatening situation.
Yeah, and that especially one of the arguments between maybe increasing the age to buy some of these, more lethal weapons from 18 to 21 is that young people can be so impulsive, at that moment, and their brains are not fully developed. They get angry. Gosh knows if you introduce some kind of substance. I mean, that seems reasonable to look at maybe limiting who has access to some of these weapons if you're not going to actually ban some of the weapons themselves, which again, I would be very surprised if it came to that anytime soon. But limiting who has access, especially young people getting hold of these types of weapons, I think that's not a bad idea. Listen,
well, and again, people, with mental illness.
Yep.
I wouldn't want to have a gun if I were if I were mentally ill. If I were a threat to myself or someone else, I'd hope someone would take it away, and that's the purpose of these so-called red flag laws.
Yeah, and as we go to the break, I was just going to mention, you're exactly right. As we mentioned, red flag, meaning that there's a red flag out there giving an indication that there's an individual, maybe because of mental illness or some incident that occurred, that they should have some limits placed on what they can do. Right now, Republicans and Democrats today are making progress, they say, something that they actually may agree on, to hammer out the details of red flag legislation that they hope can win sufficient support among Republicans to overcome a filibuster in the Senate and actually pass. So there's a possibility they're making progress on that front, and that's the idea of keeping guns out of the hands of those that may be mentally unstable or prone to maybe committing harm to themselves or someone else. We'll take a break on that note. If you're on hold, we'll get to more of your phone calls as we're talking Second Amendment and gun rights with the professor right after this.